as long as it's moving. And so I think that if this corridor is not safe for people, not just for cars, but if it's not safe for people that want to walk, that need to ride a bike, that may need, ADA compliance, then really how responsive is that for your business? And I think that goes to say, I think you guys really get it, because if it's not safe for people, you really don't have a vibrant corridor. And honestly, you don't have a business. And when you drive through this corridor, and I'll throw the cards on the table, there's some areas that probably aren't the highest and best uses right now. You could say that. Something that's probably been around for 60s or 70s type of development, and maybe it's turned over a few times. Maybe you got some residential property that are right up in front that have turned over to maybe office or medical use, clinic, that sort of thing. And so if we put in, and this is the core essence of the message, if we put in public dollar investment along this corridor, along 15th Street, and mind you, the corridor really hasn't been improved except for widening. That's it. For 100 years. If you think about it, it was a dirt road, we paved it, and then we added 2 more lanes. That's it. And we never did anything for anybody else. So if we put in public dollars, we totally expect private dollars to reinvest along the corridor, much like 5th Street and the streetscape elements there. So, and I think someone else mentioned it too. If we put in dollars for beautification or improving the corridor in terms of safety and mobility, we'd love to see private reinvestment, whether that's franchise architecture or whether that's local dollars along the corridor. I'll get off my soapbox there, but I think everybody on the call really values that. And it's good to see that we have business owners as well as Chamber Economic Development representatives as well. So my real first question here, and doing a deep dive, because I know we're halfway through our time, and let me qualify too, we are hosting 6 or 7 of these focus group discussions to dig into the specific topic. Yours happens to be economic development and reinvestment. We've had it for emergency services that Danny alluded to, mentioned earlier. We had it for beautification and historic preservation, and then bike ped advocacy. Later on today, we'll actually talk to one-on-one with neighborhood HOAs and just folks that live along the corridor. And then I think there's one other one too. Yeah, the last focus group will actually specifically talk to businesses as well. I know we got some represented here. One of the things, and I think it might have been Catherine, it might have been someone else earlier, our premise is this as we move forward. We've done a lot of due diligence. We heard a lot. The number one thing that really, I guess, threw a monkey wrench in what DOT put together, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, was that it took an exorbitant amount of right-of-way when they looked at putting in the super street and they looked at widening this corridor. Right now, if you don't know it, the right-of-way is only 60 feet from edge to edge, which isn't very wide. So our premise is this. Yes, we are looking at repurposing the roadway. Yes, it'll have an impact on traffic. It won't necessarily stop traffic, but it'll slow it down potentially. And that's a good thing as we are advocating more bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and safety measures along the entire corridor. Here's our promise to you, or at least our philosophy moving forward. We want to stay within the right-of-way that's there today, at least along the main line. Certainly at the intersections to put in left turn here and there, it may bump out, but for the most part, we're trying to stay within the right-of-way limits, which is awesome, because I think if we went beyond the right-of-way, we're going to go through the same thing that you guys went through 3 years ago. Someone mentioned access to businesses earlier, and that's our commitment. We want to provide access. Now, some areas and businesses that have 4 access points or 4 driveways along the corridor or a side street, we may control a little bit with putting in a pocket median here and there to control and make it more safe. But we're not here to take anybody's driveway, and we're certainly not here to take anybody's property. And I think that needs to be said. So those are really the 2 key design considerations as we hear from folks and absorb what their issues are. and what their problems are and needs are. Those, I think, are the philosophy that we're moving forward, at least on the design standpoint. So I'm going to stop talking there, but I think a first question to you, and this really has to come from a local context, is as you look at the 15th Street, and mind you, we're going from Brown Street all the way over to Carolina Avenue. That's 1.6 miles. And, you know, obviously within there, you got Washington Plaza. You already mentioned that. You got Washington Square and all the medical and some single family as well. What do you envision this corridor looking like in the next 10 or 15, even 20 years, if and when development and redevelopment occur along it? What's missing that you can, as professionals that understand the development community, understand the demand for different goods and services, what do you envision in terms of residential, commercial, retail, even light industrial, office? What do you see more of? What do you see less of? And anybody can answer that.
Okay, I'll go. I see, so it's one of our biggest areas of potential that we have in Washington. We spent a lot of time and resources downtown, and that looks great. And I feel like that has, I mean, truly transformed over the past 10 years from where it was back, obviously 10 years ago. But 15th Street is our next biggest potential. And right now it obviously is not being used like it could and on our part for being able to recruit retail and other things. I don't see it as much residential. That's probably because I'm seeing it from my job perspective as just one of the best areas that we can recruit for retail and grow retail in Washington. It is very unattractive, as anybody would know that travels it. And there's so much room for beautification in that area. But when I really think about 15th Street and what it can be, it can truly be a hub for a great economic development for retail and all of that. So that's where that's what I see, especially with my job.
Catherine, I would
And help me out. Was that Catherine? I just want to make sure I'm talking.
Sorry. Yeah, it's Catherine.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm on the phone.
That's okay.
Bear with me.
This is Stuart O'Neill. I would kind of echo what she says. Like I said, my business is right here on 15th Street. And I know that we're always needing more rental properties, but I honestly hate all the rental properties that are lined between here and say where Bob's property is. It's just not very attractive, and there's no room for sidewalks and things to let people travel about. So I would love to see, not necessarily more, commercial industrial, but I think that's what this street really was intended for. I don't think they were, expecting to have a bunch of 1,200 square foot houses, 10 feet from the road everywhere.
Right. And that's a little, through transition, right? Those homes have been there quite a long time, and they're going to most likely turn over. And I want to get your thoughts on that. And so, and when we think about the corridor, let's not just think about within the first 100 feet of it, but there's a lot of open space. There's a lot of green space, undeveloped land that's much further back, like in back of the Tractor Supply, in back of Washington Plaza. You got the ball field back there. I'm not even quite sure how effectively used it is, but you've got a lot of acreage up and down this corridor. That is, I don't see a whole lot of commercial going that farther back, but maybe fronting, sure, the commercial and retail, that makes sense. Am I off base on that, or what?
You're not off base. There's a lot of land that's underutilized or not utilized at all.
And
Gotcha.
Mike, this is Bob Rich. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
On that same note, on what you just said, I think the land behind like Midtown Crossing and all those open areas between 15th Street and the airport, 15th Street and Highway 17, is a perfect transition point for retail to turn into multifamily or higher density type residential situations.
Yeah, we absolutely need apartments, that's for sure. And that goes back to the manufacturing and labor force, which we're lacking, and end up living in Greenville because not because they want to, but because that's the only place you can get some decent apartments.
Okay, that is what I wanted to hear, the realistic transition, a little more density, and then you filter back to the single family that's there too. And that's expected because you're right. You need the workforce, you need affordable housing. I won't say affordable housing necessarily, but not everybody can buy $150,000, $200,000 single family. And so, and I just wanted to understand that market for demand, right? We didn't do a market analysis. If we had our druthers, we would incorporate that. We typically do. And that really helps us understand where the gaps in the system, where's the leakage factor. And I think whoever was the last person, that may or may not have been Bob, but saying, hey, we're bleeding, Greenville is filling that gap in terms of multifamily. So it's good for us to know from the experts like you, where are the gaps and where's the highest demand for goods and services on the residential side as well as the commercial. So with the commercial, and I think this is intriguing, along the corridor, what sort of, two things, do you envision franchise architecture along the 15th Street, or do you envision local dollar businesses along here? And then what types of businesses, retail, commercial, office, what types of scale, character do you guys envision?
I would like, this is Martin with Beaufort County. I mean, I'd definitely like non-franchise if possible, just because with manufacturing automating more and more, people are going to have to be more entrepreneurial in their jobs. And I think if you have commercial space, it could be, a number of things, Tinker Tailor, Soldier Sailor. No, so yeah, I would like to see not franchise. Also, we have a lack of multi-tenant facilities for small startup manufacturers or small manufacturers who might be making belts or whatever. So there can be a combination of both a storefront to sell belts, and then the back they might be making them and on the web, sending them all over the world. So I kind of envision that as a future.
I think a mixture of both would be good. The franchise names people recognize, so that brings them to that area. But I think a mixture of both local and also some franchise opportunities are important. We have people interested in this area, but we need space. We need buildings. We need opportunities for them to go into. And there are some opportunities there on 15th Street, especially with the shopping center that's across from Pamlico Plaza, that whole area.
It needs a lot of help.
Yeah. So there's opportunities, I think, do a really good mixture of that. And I do think that mixture is important, especially for 15th Street.
Mike, this is Betsy Kane. Can I jump in with a thought about commercial space? A lot of what 15th Street represents is highly local businesses. It seems like, Carolina Avenue has a lot of the franchises and of course some local establishments, but 15th Street is really lined with many of our locally owned family businesses. And I was hoping when I initiated involving a consultant in doing this plan, I was really hoping that we could avoid the property takings because people might get compensated for their property, but then so many local businesses that are along this corridor would be eliminated, even if they did receive full compensation. So I'm really glad about the idea that we could limit property acquisition and keep those. And one thing is, for local businesses, for small businesses, and for startups, we really need affordable commercial real estate, whether it's buildings or land. And I hear you talking about redevelopment, but I'm a little concerned that if you redevelop and have new space, it's likely to be more expensive. The rents are going to be more expensive. The building costs are going to be more expensive. And a critical component of startups and smaller firms is that they have to have low rent before they get a foothold. And 15th Street really, I mean, I know a lot of the buildings are deteriorated. It could use improvement, but at the same time, that makes them cheap and accessible. And that's where you can get a startup that then climbs the ladder, right? If you have any thought, if anybody has any thoughts on that, I appreciate it.
I would just say, you've got the Harbour District Market downtown. If you could do something similar to that over in that old shopping center where people can have, their small business or whatever, but isn't, looking ugly in terms of, I agree with you about the low cost, but I would like it to be maybe some sort of facility to get the businesses started that looks good, and then they move out of that into some other nice space after, as you say, a year or two. I think keeping the old space to accommodate that is not going to accommodate growth. Just my thought.
Yeah, so this is Mike, and that was Martin, right?
Sorry, I keep on forgetting to say my name.
No, it's only for mine. I just like to know who we're talking to too, so I appreciate it. But yeah, so in there lies the issue, right? And you are certainly, again, there's not much we could do about this. I love private the competition, right? Let's face it, when we do put in the public dollars, these are tax dollars that are improving that infrastructure, like the sewer line and like the transportation, the roadway and the bike and ped, you're going to see values increase. That's just, there's no doubt about it. And we're hoping that happens to do the same, but it's an incubator, right, Betsy? It's not to say, and I will challenge you, because it's much easier to retrofit as long as you're not on a Superfund site, and those guys know what I'm talking about, or a gas station you're trying to reuse. But I'll pick on Washington Plaza right now. We've seen a lot of turnover there. I think you have 2 Mexican restaurants on the same, and one's an out parcel. So, and a lot of sea of parking that's not being maintained. And so when you have the infrastructure there already, water, sewer, power, and the like, and the infrastructure and the foundation, let's face it, it's easier to retrofit something like that now, but it's got to be attractive, and there's got to be incentives too. So my question to the community, and maybe the leadership too, is, are there incentives for people to reinvest in their property along 15th Street? Does the city incentivize through tax abatement or through financial measures or some other incentive to advocate for folks to do something different with their property or reinvest in their property? Because, over time, you're right. It doesn't mean your rental per square foot is going to go through the roof, not necessarily, because, obviously, if you build something from scratch, you've got to have that return on investment, and therefore your per square foot rental is going to be dictated by how much investment you put in there. And it's a heck of a lot more if you're doing a greenfield than you are retrofitting something else. So are there, regardless of whether it's a redevelopment or it's a development, are there certain incentives that you guys and policies that you guys have put in place to get the right type of business in there? And honestly, as a practitioner, I don't care what you put in the building. I care about what it looks like, and if it's inviting and attractive and safe and friendly.
There are state funds for building renovation, and there is a county, county and a city policy for creating jobs and investment. The dilemma in North Carolina is that there is a constitutional amendment against using public money for private purposes. And then when the Supreme Court, the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled They talked about it in terms of competition from out of state. So it is a little difficult to get around, but probably a good lawyer could get around it. But this is Martin again, sorry. I'll leave it at.
Yeah, no, that's great, Martin. But yeah, you can, again, not talking necessarily financial incentives. You can have an overlay tax district. You can provide some tax relief for the first 3 years. We've done this a number of locations all over the state. So, but it's not handing over money. But you can have even the simple things like you mentioned, like a facade treatment or things to incentivize folks to reinvest in their properties too. So that's good. All right, I'll be quiet now, but this is awesome. So talk to us about the types. We talked a little bit about, and it sounds like we've got a mix of franchise versus local dollar investment. That's interesting. We don't necessarily, and this is the thing, I don't think you necessarily want to compete with your downtown, compete with the Fifth Street. That's not what this is about. But what do you think in terms of the types of businesses would there be the highest demand? Again, we didn't do a market analysis, but I'm really leaning on your expertise and knowing that industry and knowing that corridor. What sort of types of businesses would you think would be very attractive or appealing to the investor?
Catherine, you've done a lot of work on this.
Well, so, and Jonathan, I don't know if this has been discussed yet, but the city is still in contract with Retail Strategies, right?
Yes, yeah, they're still doing some analysis on citywide on what we're missing, some leakage issues and things like that.
And so on the leakage reports that we used to have, or the ones that they used to go off of, it was still grocery stores and things like that, clothing, that sort of thing, correct?
Yes, I think those are grocery and food options are the number one missing link currently, and then a couple of other retail options.
Yeah, so that's been there for, well, the last one that I looked at was 6 or 7 years ago, was grocery options and some other things like that. So I think that, Washington is a great town, but I do believe that the local people here and the visitors that are coming here are wanting more. And I think that those opportunities are available. And I think 15th Street is the most likely place that they should go. So, you've got those options of the food. I mean, obviously Food Line moved there, but I think that their grocery store options are still important. I do like what Bob said about the housing and that piece and making it all kind of tie together. But also we have a lot of retail options that are still missing here that people leave to go purchase in Greenville or some other places.
Very much.
Yeah, this is Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with I agree with everything that everyone said. There's one thing that you have to bear in mind here when you talk about these retail establishments and others that are not in Washington, and people leave Washington and go spend their money in Greenville. And it's for a very simple reason, and that's the demographics. The heads and beds in Washington are not going to support a Target. They're not going to support the other ones that go to Greenville. Heck, we're still trying to get a Chick-fil-A, and we should have one. But because of politics, they're not coming here. We put them in Elizabeth City, but they're not coming to Washington yet. So, until there is some growth in numbers of people in the statistical marketing area, it will be very, very difficult to get those kind of franchises or even local type businesses that depend on a higher demographic in Washington. So we kind of need to deal with what we've got as far as people are concerned and try and fill in the blanks there as to what we need. Definitely another grocery store would be great, but Food Line took care of that when they moved into the mall and put a restriction on the other store out there that Piggly Wiggly wanted to go in. So I mean, that's the reality of what we've got. We're a small town.
This is Martin again. Bob, I've got an ability to, do some radius analysis or drive time analysis. So one thing, although obviously this is a Washington project, thank you, Jonathan, there is a potential, I think, to show a larger population that obviously comes in, particularly from, say, the east, maybe not so much from the west because of Greenville, but, north, south, and east. And I think we can show a larger population and maybe even somewhat higher income population than just purely the city itself in, in the advertising and marketing of this. Although we'd obviously call it the City of Washington, I think we might call it the greater city of Washington, something like that, to show people like, these franchises, there's more people here. Plus that road is incredibly busy. So, there's great opportunity there as well.
Yes.
Yeah, you
This
guys
is
bring up some
Betsy.
really good points. Go ahead,
Oh,
Betsy.
sorry. Well, I was going to say, in terms of incentives, I think the biggest incentive for businesses and redevelopment or improvements in that area is simply the private response to public investment. I think the biggest thing we could do to revitalize the business corridor is revitalize the physical corridor, make it appealing, make it walkable, bikeable, and safer to drive, make it a corridor that is so attractive that attractive in various ways, not just aesthetically or beauty, but in terms of its functionality and appeal. If we do that, the businesses will naturally add lines of products and services. The real estate will naturally attract more interest, and that's the biggest incentive. When we finish your process, Mike, I would like the city to do a corridor plan that includes, standards for offers of cross access between, as sites redevelop, we will need to have cross access between them so that all the driveways don't have to empty onto the road and improve and increase the safety problems. We need cross access. We need redevelopment standards. We don't want to decrease redevelopment. We want to encourage it. And I think if we had a good corridor plan, if we had the zoning and development standards we need to augment what we do with the road, what DOT ends up doing with the road, would be really good. We don't have a history in Washington of strong corridor planning. We did do it on downtown Main Street. That was an excellent corridor plan, but I want to do it for 15th Street. I want to do it for Carolina Avenue. I want to do it for Bridge Street, the entry into our town from the riverside. So I feel like after this process, a corridor plan would be good, and that would be a huge incentive, a signal to the private sector that you won't lose your shirt over here. In fact, the public side is doing everything we can to support reinvestment over here instead of continuing to just let it go.
So I'll go back a little bit too to what Bob said with the demographics and how it is hard to recruit businesses when you pull up the reports for the demographics and you look at the numbers. But Bob, I also have to go back to what you did at Midtown Crossing and what that looked like before and how you were able to recruit and fill that building up with some great businesses. And that's a mixture. And so I do think that there is hope that obviously with people like you, Bob, and others, that some of that can happen along 15th Street as well.
Let me tell you just a 30-second story about that. Charles Phillips and I tried hard to recruit Tractor Supply because we thought they'd be a great addition to Washington. We literally begged the real estate guy to take a look at it, and he said it's too small. And we said, no, it's not too small, and we can prove that to you. He said, well, if you're going to prove it to me, I'll give you 15 minutes in Las Vegas at the convention. So Charles and I got on an airplane, and we had a complete map set up of a community east of Washington and west of Washington and south of Washington, and the people and the types of people and why Tractor Supply would make it. And we gave them our 15 minutes worth in Las Vegas, and they ended up coming here.
That's great.
So that's just a
Well,
little
folks-
story of what you have to do to get these kind of businesses. And I think there's more out there that we could have, and in improving the infrastructure and street and that whole deal will encourage it.
This is William. Just kind of echoing some of those comments, and just to kind of to draw a kind of a concept. I think that if you think about it, what's happened with downtown and our streetscapes and the energy that's created, the positive feedback, just I mean, from outsiders that are coming to our town going, and I'm talking about people that are from here coming back going, wow, my daughter did that. She lives in Greenville, South Carolina, which is a much larger town, but they've done some unbelievable things there. Of course, much different demographics, surely. But as you kind of think about what's happening with downtown, and then you think about 15th Street, and you think about a golf course, and I kind of like to do a golf course analogy for a lot of things. Every good golf course, most every good golf course has a signature hole. Cypress Landing has a signature hole over on number 15, I believe, that overlooks Chocowinity Bay. And, you know, from my perspective, when I think about what's going on downtown and seeing, you know, the Moss Landing project and the Harbor District and the streetscapes, we have a kind of a signature hole there, and it's got the water on it. But as Bob alluded to earlier, with the demographic challenges that Washington has from a lot of different perspectives, we need two signature holes. One on the front nine and one on the back nine. And I think this 15th Street corridor, if done with this, you know, this road diet concept, and you know, safe streets and that kind of mentality, I think we'll have a second signature hole here in Washington, which can only be good for all of the citizens and for economic development and our community. So just a little analogy there. That was the word I was looking for earlier. For whatever that's worth. Thank you.
Yeah,
That is.
I'm gonna chime in just a moment. William, I like your analogy of the front, the front hole in the back nine. I like your analogy. So I'm gonna use that.
Thank you, Donald.
And I think we're going to memorialize that too. Dan, write that quote down. That's hilarious. That's awesome. But you know what? It's an analogy, but we get it. We don't want to duplicate the same signature hole, but we want to make something unique on 15th Street, just as beautiful and just as attractive as, you know, kind of what we did in 15th or on 5th Street and the streetscape downtown. Folks, we are running out of time. We're out of time, but this has been actually really, really good. We got to go to another focus group discussion. I think the next one upcoming is the neighborhoods and residents. And so one of the things I promise you, I know we're looking at the transportation, but we got really excited yesterday hearing from folks. We're going to look at potential, some easy, I guess, site planning 101. And we want to show people not what to do with their land, right? We're just taking a parcel here, some vacant land as well, but to take a look at some what ifs. You know, let's take a look at what if redevelopment was going to happen? What if development was going to happen and some of the multifamily in the back, and maybe some reuse of maybe the Washington Plaza, just to play what if. Again, not telling people what to do with their property, but what things we can expect to see over the next 10 or 15 years as development interest is reinvested in this corridor. So hang with us. We'd love to get your perspective on that and some feedback on that. But I think it's going to be a really exciting piece when we look beyond just the transportation, the corridor, and making those improvements, but what's going to happen beyond the right of way. And I think that gets folks really excited as well. With that in mind, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully you guys can join us at 5 o'clock this evening or the grand finale tomorrow at 5 p.m. So with that, have a wonderful evening. We'll have a wonderful day and enjoy your time. Thank you.
Take care all.
Thank you.